In this country, in the United States of America, I think it's impossible not to acknowledge that we as a society idolize the wealthy, that we as a nation have decided that our greatest cultural heroes are those who can make the most money. We have decided that our one last great common pursuit is the pursuit of profits. When taken to the extremes that Jack Welch did it, when it means firing 10% of your workers every year, when it means doing everything you can to pay as little taxes as possible, when it means shipping factories, whole factories overseas, so that all of a sudden in the Rust Belt, there's no good paying jobs, is that worth it? At what point does the pursuit of profits actually lose the plot? And suddenly we got real problems in this country that we're having to deal with. When we lionize the pursuit of wealth at every cost, at what point do we wake up and say, wait a sec, we've actually lost our society here. We've lost our country.
And so joining us now is David 𝗕liche. He is the author of The Man Who Broke Capitalism, How Jack Welch Gutted the Heartland and Crushed the Soul. Man, that is a brutal statement, crushing the soul of corporate America, and how he undid his legacy. So this is a very powerful book. I had the opportunity, David, to read the book over the weekend. Boy, you got into it real hard. I want to start at the top, though. Jack Welch, my opinion. I grew up with Jack Welch. I have a copy of his book that he wrote when he retired. It was autographed to me. I thought he was a superstar. He's the first real celebrity CEO. So let's start with the basics. Why Jack, and why were you the person to write this book?
Sure. Well, Anthony, thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you because you're one of these people who I know grew up with Welch sort of very much top of mind as you came up in the business world. So why Jack Welch? Well, he was, as you say, the first celebrity CEO, the most influential CEO at the most influential company for the last 2 decades of the 20th century. And he personally groomed, as you know, more CEOs who went on to run other major American companies than any other CEO in history, really. So it was not only the influence he had at GE during his 20 years running the place and turning it into what literally became the most valuable company in the world, but it was also his influence on so much of the economy beyond GE, the other companies, the other CEOs, and hey, we'll get into it, the rules and regulations and expectations about how companies behave.
You know, I read the GE Way. I read Larry Bossidy's book. These are all the, acolytes, people that were around Jack. Obviously, Bob Nardelli wrote a book. You write about all of these colorful figures, but I want you to set the scene for our younger viewers and listeners. Describe the real magnitude and influence of General Electric. What it was like in the global situation. Like you said, I grew up with him, so anytime I saw him in Fortune magazine, I had to read about him. If he was in Business Week, I had to read about him. They called him Neutron Jack when he first got started, so you talk about that as well. Set the scene for what this was at its time, General Electric.
Yeah, well, I'll start even before Jack takes over the company in 1981. It's hard to overstate how influential General Electric was to really the American industrial economic story of the 20th century. This is the company that made or introduced or popularized everything from the toaster to the television to the refrigerator to the radio to the nuclear power plant to the jet engine. This was the company that single-handedly pulled America into the 20th century and essentially provided the framework, the foundation for the middle class. And so against that backdrop, this already supremely influential company that also had a history of essentially creating management structures, organizational structures, redefining how it is that large corporations organize their people and promoted talent. In walks this man, Jack Welch, in 1981 into the C-suite with an absolutely different vision of how he's going to run this company from the way it had been run for the decades before. out was this vision that was defined by the golden age of capitalism and men like his successor, Red Jones, the people who ran companies like IBM and Xerox, these benevolent sort of post-war employers. And out goes that vision of really taking care of their employees, of striking a balance with all stakeholders and taking care of communities and supply chains. And Jack Welch arrives on the job with a single-minded mission of making GE the most valuable company in the world, of putting shareholders first, and doing whatever he needs to do to make as much money as possible. And now you can argue that's the right thing to do, but the consequences of how he ran the company with that single-minded vision in mind are still with us today.
Very well said. In the 1970s, a critical time for the U.S., we had, we may be going back to the 70s. We'll talk about that in a second. We've had some stagflation. We had high inflation, but high unemployment. Literally a catastrophe going on for the U.S. in the 70s as it related to the economy. We had this emergence of conservative economists like Milton Friedman. Friedman was a ruthless capitalist. He held the view that companies should be maximizing profits at all costs. Talk us through that time. You cover it in the book brilliantly. How did the Friedman doctrine emerge as an intellectual force in the West, and how did it affect Jack Welch and General Electric?
Yeah, well, I love it when my interviewers are so well versed in their history. And here's the deal. In those post-war years, the government, obviously, thanks largely to Keynesianism, had a strong hand in the design of the economy. There were more rules and regulations, certainly, than there are today. They were taking, regulators were taking a stronger hand in sort of shaping and setting guardrails around how companies could operate. There was an intellectual backlash to that situation that began in the 1970s. You mentioned Friedman. Men like Friedrich Hayek at the Mont Pelerin School on the other side of the pond were a part of this too. And they began to question the degree to which governments ought to be meddling in the free market and the degree to which large corporations should stop thinking about all these other things like suppliers and taxes and supply chains and instead focus exclusively on making money. But that was an intellectual exercise for a decade. You know, Milton Friedman wrote those famous words, "The social responsibility of a business is to maximize its profits," in the New York Times Magazine in 1971, a full decade before Welch came over. But it was only when Jack Welch took over in 1981 that someone came to a corner office with a company that had the power, the clout, and the scale to make good on those ambitions, that we actually saw what it looked like in practice. And that begins the real revolution that Welch unleashes over the next 20 years.
I was struck by the balance between the shareholder and the stakeholder. And we seem to go back and forth culturally between the shareholder and the stakeholder. Was Welch's focus on the shareholder the main transformation at that time?
I think a lot of it certainly boils down to it. We can talk about the tactics he used, but yeah, I do believe that this era of shareholder primacy, he was really the first mainstream CEO of a big multinational corporation to put that ethos at the absolute center of so many of his decision-making processes. Now, how did that play out? That played out in things like his relentless campaign of downsizing. You mentioned that he was called Neutron Jack. He earned that moniker within the first couple of years of taking over the company. And he did it because he fired something like 125,000 people within months of taking over. No CEO.
Yeah, you write about it, Neutron Jack. Right, of course, that's
done that kind of thing before.
Yeah, so again, for younger viewers, the neutron bomb, we used to talk about it in the 70s and 80s. It was a bomb that would blow up. None of the buildings would go down, but all the people would die from radiation. Of course, Jack let go 125,000 people, so they called that Neutron Jack. But he he earned a halo. He earned this incredible reputation. Okay, but there's a debate. It's still prevalent in today's society. What is the true purpose of the corporation? And the pendulum has really swung, David. Am I wrong? I mean, it swung from the Jack Welch era to a totally different spot today.
Oh, there we disagree. I think we may see the glimmers of a transformation, but I make the case that we are still very much living in Jack Welch's world.
Okay.
If you look at the way companies responded just over the last couple of years, 2.5 years during the pandemic, we time and again have seen them put shareholders first, before workers, before communities, before the government, before the environment. And now listen, the labor market, strangely, the weirdest thing that has happened, and I'm going to talk about this in the afterword of my book when the paperback edition comes out next year, the pandemic actually turned the labor market, as we all know, upside down. And workers, for the first time in decades, really since Jack Welch came on the scene, have been experiencing real gains. But that was largely the effect not of some new benevolent realization on the part of CEOs that they had a social responsibility to their workers. Instead, for the most part, it was driven by a really tight labor market where they had to start paying more to get the people they needed to keep the lights on.
All right. Well, listen, I'm fascinated by your take because you go deep into the well with Jack Welch and GE. So let's talk a little bit about that. Okay, you talk about the M&A space. Jack made 1,000 deals in 20 years, which is sort of unbelievable when you think about it. One of which was acquiring RCA, which gave GE control of NBC, which also changed the business landscape. Okay, but you also write about this. Did it impact the rise of disinformation?
Yeah, this is one of the most sort of amazing threads I found. And the disinformation piece, you can see glimmers of it during his tenure as CEO. But I really make the case that the most powerful bit of disinformation that Jack Welch engaged in actually came in his retirement. In 2012, and you can appreciate that from your time in the administration, Anthony, the Bureau of Labor Statistics put out its monthly jobs report on a Friday. This was October 2012. President Obama was up for re-election just a month later, and the numbers were good. For the first time, I think we saw real job gains since the financial crisis, and the economy was looking really good. Jack Welch couldn't believe it, and so he took to Twitter and accused the Obama administration, the Bureau of Labor and Statistics, of fabricating, of falsifying those job numbers to benefit the president politically. It unleashed a font, an absolute torrent of disinformation.
Well, he also went on CNBC. He also went on CNBC, and they interviewed him related to this.
Absolutely, right? And he went on Anderson Cooper. He went everywhere. Everyone started talking about this, but there was zero truth to it. It was one of these suppositions, right? Like it didn't feel right to him, so he put it out there, and all of a sudden, it's very hard to put the genie back in the bottle once a lie is out there. And it went viral, and your former boss, Donald Trump, picked it up and said, the Obama administration was quote unquote monkeying around with the numbers. And it went on and on and on. And this was happening, of course, right, as former President Trump, then just Mr. Trump, was promoting his birtherism campaign, another absolute, font of disinformation that endures to this day. And so, yeah, these two men, who, by the way, were friends and business partners for decades, they absolutely contributed to some of the early disinformation. Reminded me, this is a decade ago, that still, of course, is with us today.
Was dying, and when I finished the book, I was dying to ask you this question. No one knows the answer, but I would love your take.
Yeah.
Is Jack Welch, did he create that culture? Was he a part of that culture and responding to that culture? If Jack Welch was the CEO of General Electric today, would he have handled himself differently pursuant to today's culture? What's your take on that?
Yeah, this is one of the most fun thought experiments, and I wish I had had the chance to interview Jack. I only literally came up with the idea for the book right after he died, and actually there was a moment where an event around his death sort of crystallized the degree to which he was actually the story, the narrative that explains so much of the world we're in today. Now, to the question of how he would be running GE today, or what he would be like as a CEO today, I'm of two minds about it. On the one hand, this was the master of meeting the moment. And you can make the case that, yes, Jack Welch came to the job with this singular vision and executed on his ambition more ferociously and more ruthlessly and relentlessly and efficiently than really anyone ever did as a CEO. And so you can imagine that he would have brought to today's much more complex era of what it means to be a CEO and the various parties you have to appease as a leader today, some of that same intuition, some of that same shrewdness. On the other hand, it's hard to see how his embrace of things like outsourcing, offshoring, financialization, rampant deal making would really square and fit in today's much more complex, nuanced economy. And of course, it was that combination of tactics that allowed him to have all the success. So I really question whether he would have been able to succeed as well as he had, even if he could have used some of that, raw intuition and intelligence, which he had in spades, to navigate the very turbulent waters of what it means to be a CEO today.
So back in that day, and this is before Sarbanes-Oxley, and this is before all of that financial regulation got put into place, and they were expensing stock options, they're not allowed to do anymore, all that different stuff. He was trying to beat street estimates every single quarter. And there was a string of quarters where he was successful in doing that, David. And there were some times where he was 1 penny ahead or 2 pennies ahead. And a lot of people say there was a lot of accounting shenanigans going on there. What's your response to all that?
Yeah, as you mentioned, it was before Sarbox, so we will, I think, never know the details of what was inside, what was going on inside GE, and specifically GE Capital during that epic run from sort of the early 90s right until his retirement in 2001. Here's what we can say, though. Jack Welch, from the moment he became CEO, identified GE Capital as really the key to unlocking GE's potential as an absolute financial powerhouse. And what he understood was that technology was changing and Wall Street was about to change. He understood that it was easier to make money with money than it was to make money by, say, building a refrigerator in Kentucky. And he understood that he had the opportunity to create inside GE what was effectively an unregulated bank. And he made good on all those ambitions. And so by the time of his retirement, GE Capital, which started as essentially, a small financing arm, helping customers amortize the price of a big appliance or helping small companies pay off a large power plant or a large piece of equipment over the course of many months or years, he turned that into this absolute hydra-headed financial arm that had everything from Thai auto loans to satellite leasing corporations to high-interest credit card operations. And ultimately, it got so bad that as Jeff Immelt chased profits with GE Capital in the years after Welch retired, Jeff Immelt in 2005 buys WMC, one of the country's largest provider of subprime mortgages. So then when the financial crisis hit, who's holding one of the largest brackets of subprime? It's GE. And that just explains the degree to which the finance arm absolutely went out of control. And just lastly, I will point out, because I know you asked about earnings. Yeah, during the 90s especially, it was GE Capital that allowed Jack and his team to manage those earnings so smoothly. Now, Jack always denied that they managed earnings, but people like Gary Wendt, who actually ran GE Capital, he acknowledged on the record at the time that of course they did it. That's exactly what they were doing with it.
So you're a fascinating guy, okay? You've got a great writing style. You said something at the beginning of the book that caught all of us, my production team, me. The first sentence is the book is about society and their heroes. What do you mean?
Yeah, well, I'm going to acknowledge, Anthony, for those of us who are viewing this, but for listeners, behind you, there's like a picture of Superman in front of the American flag, and we got a picture of Muhammad Ali, and that to me is just a part of the same conversation, because the question I ask in the very first pages of the book is, who do we hold up as our heroes? And in this country, in the United States of America, I think it's impossible not to acknowledge that we as a society idolize the wealthy, that we as a nation have decided that our greatest cultural heroes are those who can make the most money. And some of that goes right back to the founding of this country, right? There is Adam Smith, there is de Tocqueville at the roots of this conversation. And we have to also acknowledge that we are a melting pot and we do not have a shared religion in common. We are by definition a country that has been thrown together. And so it seems to me that we have decided that our one last great common pursuit is the pursuit of profits. And now there could be good to that. I'm not a communist. I'm not a socialist. I'm a capitalist. I understand that the pursuit of profits can result in great things in this country and for individual families. But at what cost? When taken to the extremes that Jack Welch did it, when it means firing 10% of your workers every year, when it means doing everything you can to pay as little taxes as possible, so municipalities don't have the money to pave their roads and pay for their schools, when it means shipping factories, whole factories, not just the jobs, but the factories themselves overseas, so that all of a sudden in the Rust Belt, there's no good paying jobs, is that worth it, right? At what point does the pursuit of profits actually lose the plot? And suddenly we got real problems in this country that we're having to deal with. That's sort of the deeper question I'm trying to ask here. When we lionize the pursuit of wealth at every cost, at what point do we wake up and say, wait a sec, we've actually lost our society here. We've lost our country.
It's interesting because there's a book called American Amnesia, which is addressing your topic, which is basically we found our best way for the middle class, our best way for America, where there was an intersection between the corporate community, the small business community, and American government, and there was a 𝗕liche𝗹𝗵𝗿, if you will, for Americans that were doing well. There was an idea that they were going to figure out a way to pay workers more. They were going to figure out a way to holistically look at the social contract. Henry Ford once said, I'm going to make sure that I pay my workers enough so that they can afford the cars that they're producing. And it seems like in the 1980s, we sort of lost our way from that. And then obviously there's been a big separation between the CEOs in terms of the multiples of salary that they're making relative to the, the workers, if you will. Before I go to my fun little quiz here, which you're not prepared for, which I'm going to juice you up on, I want to ask one last question, and that's about the succession issue for Welch. Because you go into it, what do you think of Jeff Immelt? I'll fully disclose he's a personal friend of mine. I like Jeff a great deal. I didn't want to say that to you though to varnish anything you were going to say, but what did you think of what he did there? Should Nardelli have been the person? What do you think happened there? And do you think it was a success? And I think he put Jeff in a very tough spot, by the way.
Well, listen, a lot of people like Jeff because Jeff is an amicable guy. And that was one of the reasons why I think he was tapped to be Jack's successor. I think anyone who followed Jack was going to have a really, really hard run. Let's remember what Jeff Immelt's second day on the job was. It was September 11th, 2001. And the world changed under his feet real fast. And within years, you had the collapse of Enron, Tyco, You had the arrival of Sarbanes-Oxley. And so the world in which Jack Welch created the GE that became the most valuable company in the world simply didn't exist within days of Jeff taking over. Now, Jeff and I went back and forth about this a lot in our extensive interview for the book, and subsequently we've had it out in an exchange on LinkedIn. He makes the case that he really tried to, turn the page and create a different GE. I look at all of his decisions and it looks like a heck of a lot of more of the same to me. Now, he had an opportunity, and he acknowledged that in his interview with me. He had an opportunity. There were two. There was one at 9/11 and another in the financial crisis, to take those moments and really fundamentally uproot GE Capital, to really reassess what GE could be and how it could succeed in the 21st century. And what he said to me, he used this one word, which I'll never forget. He said it was so seductive. The allure of hitting earnings. Just one more time, he didn't want to be the guy to miss after Jack had hit for almost 80 quarters in a row. And so they turned to GE Capital one more time for a good earnings report. They kept making those deals. They kept trying to find ways, to repeat the Jack Welch playbook of success. And ultimately, it, of course, doomed GE, which is now being broken up into 3 separate companies.
And it was the wrong place in the wrong time. Sometimes your timing is everything in terms of how you're going to handle or execute something. Okay, so the title of my show is it's an open book. Okay, so since I'm an open book, David, each week I ask my guests to humor me with the following couple of quizzes. Okay, so I want you to bear with me. This is an off-the-cuff conversation. You said something that got my production team all in a tiz. That's the understand a civilization, consider its heroes. So we put together a short quiz of prominent historical heroes. It's simple true or false questions. You probably don't know the answers, or maybe you do. Okay, but you got to cuff it. Okay, you got to say true or false.
All right.
Okay, ready? Cleopatra was the only female pharaoh to rule ancient Egypt. True or false?
False.
All right, very good. Female pharaohs were rare, but she wasn't the only one. 14 centuries before, 𝗕cie declared herself ruler after her husband's death. Okay, pretty good. Okay, President Harry S. Truman's middle initial S didn't stand for anything. True or false?
True.
All right, so you are rocking and rolling here. Both his grandfathers had names beginning with an S, so his mother didn't want to disappoint either of them. So he was Harry S. Truman. His middle name was S. Love that? Okay, King Henry VIII of England had servants whose job was to wipe his bottom after he used the bathroom. True or false?
True.
All right, you are rocking, rolling. They were called grooms of stool. These poor sons of bitches. Okay, during his reign, King Henry VIII had all 4 knighted for wiping his ass. Okay. Number 4, Roman Emperor Caligula made one of his favorite swords a senator.
Say that again.
So, the Roman Emperor Caligula. He made one of his favorite swords a senator. True or false?
Made it a senator?
Yes.
I'll go true.
Okay. All right. So I got you there. See, that I had a little spin you there. Okay. Because Caligula actually made one of his favorite horses a senator. The sword was an inanimate object, but he was a crazy bastard. Okay. Number 5, Queen Elizabeth II was a professional dressage writer before becoming the Queen of the United Kingdom.
False.
Okay, you are right. But let me tell you something interesting about her. When she turned 18, she insisted on joining the army and trained as a truck driver and a mechanic. And if you remember, her uncle was the King of England, or was going to be the King of England. Her father got the job after he abdicated. So she was not expecting to be queen, yet she's had this amazing 70-year run. Number 6, Ben Franklin loved farting so much that he wrote an essay about it.
Absolutely true. I know this for a fact.
Okay, yeah. And so it actually became a pamphlet. It was a best-selling book. It was one of his best writings. I love the book. I actually have a coffee mug inspired by it. Ben Franklin once sent a letter, now entitled "Fart Proudly," to the Royal Academy of Brussels. They were horrified, but he enjoyed farting. And you may remember this from Walter Isaacson's book. We had no money, the Continental Congress, and so they were over there trying to get support from the French, and John Adams and him were sleeping in the same bed, and Franklin farted so much that Adams had to open the window and caught cold, almost pneumonia, and died as a result of Franklin's farting. Okay, number 7.
Apocryphal, Anthony, excuse me. My very first job was turning Walter Isaacson's book into a museum exhibition. So I know my Benjamin Franklin.
Okay, so there you go.
The Adams and Franklin exchange, unfortunately, was a little transposed. Adam insisted that the windows be closed because he didn't want it to be so cold. And Franklin is the one who insisted that
there you go.
Windows open because it was better for respiratory health.
You got it better than me, but I read the book, but I've obviously misremembered it. But I will tell you this: it was a fun book. Number 7. After Van Gogh died, the innkeeper where he was staying sold one of his paintings for $1,500.
False.
Okay, you were right again. Van Gogh died. The innkeeper sold both paintings for $10 because they thought they were useless due to quote-unquote deterioration. All right, ready? Quiz number 1 is about to end. Okay, Franklin D. Roosevelt once accidentally ran into a naked Winston Churchill in the White House.
True.
That is totally true. When Roosevelt apologized, Churchill said the Prime Minister of Great Britain has nothing to hide from the President of the United States. Churchill later recalled the incident for King George VI, of course, Queen Elizabeth's dad, saying, "Sir, I believe I'm the only man in the world to have received the head of a nation naked." Okay, we got one last quiz for you, and I'm going to let you go. Okay, you've got past slogans of General Electric in the book, including "Progress is our most important product," "Accent on value," "We bring good things to life." Of course, all of us know that one. So how well do you know some of these other famous slogans and taglines, David? I'm going to read them out. Give me your best guess where they might be from. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
You ready?
Yep.
The original, if your grandfather hadn't worn it, you wouldn't exist.
The original. If your grandfather hadn't worn it, you wouldn't exist.
All right, I'm going to give you that one. It's Old Spice. Old Spice.
Good.
You see that? It was attracting your grandmother. Look at that. Okay.
I was thinking condoms, but then the condoms wouldn't have worked.
Yeah, no, that wouldn't be the right one. But that's a good thought by you, you dirty-minded individual. Very good thought. Okay, number 2, the juice is loose. The juice is loose.
Juicy fruit.
Okay, you're close on that. It's Starburst, the candy Starburst.
Right.
Okay, all right. This is one that I would remember because of my age, but perhaps you would not. Quality never goes out of style.
God. I don't know, like Marshall.
Oh, that's Levi's jeans. That's Levi's jeans. Okay, this is a political one. Feel the burn. Feel the burn.
Oh God. Was that like Howard?
All right,
Dean?
so that's from Bernie Sanders.
Burn.
Right, this one you should be able to get. This is related to junk food. Bet you can't just eat one. Just eat one.
The Pringles?
Yeah, close. Lay's potato chips. Very good. Okay. The bane of your foot's existence. The bane of your foot's existence. It's a weird one.
The bane of your foot's existence?
Yeah.
Like,
it's actually from Lego. That was actually from Lego. So that's a throw off there. All right. Okay. So this one, I should know this one. So natural, no one can tell.
Like hair stuff.
Just for men.
Just for men.
Of course, I'm not Rudy Giuliani. I actually pay a union colorist to do my hair. Okay. I'm not going to let it drip down the side of my face. David, thank you for being a good sport. One more time, the book is The Man The Man Who Broke Capitalism, How Jack Welch Gutted the Heartland and Crushed the Soul of Corporate America, and How to Undo His Legacy. It is a phenomenal book. It's a brilliant read. I want everybody to go out and buy it, and I'm looking forward to the afterword in your paperback as well. But you wrote one hell of a book, and kudos to you, sir.
Thanks so much, Anthony. Great to hear you.